Hi, everybody. This is Tracy Malone from NarcissistAbuseSupport.com. I am going to bring you a very special guest today, Dr. Craig Malkin, the author of Rethinking Narcissism. He is a clinical psychologist and a lecturer at Harvard Medical School. And he's just so powerfully brilliant that I had to bring him in here today to talk about negative thought patterns like catastrophizing and just thinking in ways that hurt us. We, go to these things because of our PTSD, and he's going to help us untangle exactly why the PTSD and the reactions from our abuse are putting us in this place where we don't feel safe and where we need to protect ourselves with some negative thought patterns. Catastrophizing is my specialty. But we all have stories in our mind. It's when the stories go negative that they have an impact on us, and they can affect our mood and affect everything about us. They can put fear in our hearts. And today, Dr. Craig is going to explain to us what to do, what the tie between PTSD is, and let's go meet Dr. Craig Malkin.
Thank you so much for having me, Tracy.
I am so honored that you are here. As you and I know, I've been trying to get you on my screen for a while, and it's great to have you here. Your expertise is going to come in really handy today because we're going to be talking about the negative thought patterns. Our brains are just loaded with stories, but when they have gone awry, when we have been through abuse, we tend to go and attach ourselves to the negative thought patterns. And, I thought we'd start off by having you give us an explanation of what are negative thought patterns.
So I think probably the easiest place to start is the way negative thought patterns arise out of trauma.
That's what my second question was. So it's a perfect lead in.
It's related. What are these negative thought patterns? What is catastrophic thinking? And when you really look at what happens for people, they're thinking about dangers to come to themselves, dangers to come to people they care about, general dangers in life, and signs that it might happen. And people wind up going through in their mind, what if I lose my job? What if my child gets sick? What if my child turns out to be narcissistic like my ex? I hear a lot of things like that. That's a strong theme. So it's this preoccupation with any difficulty, bump in the road problem leading to this danger down the line. And the example of the kid is a good one, because what happens is I'll be helping somebody and they'll have some sign of selfishness in their kid, right? It's not chronic, it's not a pattern yet. I get that too, but they'll see something and they're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen here? Is this rubbing off on my child? So it's a great example of how it happens in parenting. Why do we develop these catastrophic patterns of thought? Let's talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, because that's really, we can go through point by point how different clusters of symptoms and experience relate to catastrophic thinking.
Okay.
So first, I'm just going to go over, if for those of you who are listening and watching who already know this, forgive the review, but remember, post-traumatic stress disorder can really be thought of as a cluster of avoidance of thoughts, feelings, and reminders of an original trauma that caused the trauma feelings themselves. Re-experiencing symptoms, which is feeling as though it's happening again, like flashbacks, intrusive thoughts when you're relaxed and just sort of bored and they pop into your head. Hyperarousal, feeling keyed up on an edge all the time. This is an important one. It's an overactive sympathetic nervous system state. Where that constant, that's what sympathetic nervous system arousal is. It's being constantly in fight or flight. And then hypervigilance, being on guard for potential danger. So anybody who's been abused could have any one of, and usually all of those responses, whether it's relational abuse, say with an extremely narcissistic partner, or parents, and or direct physical abuse. And the starting point for catastrophic thinking is when we are in a chronic sympathetic nervous system state. The whole point of it is to orient us to safety or danger. Is this safe? Is this dangerous? And the cost of underestimating the danger when we've experienced a lot of upsetting, distressing, dangerous situations is high enough that what happens is we immediately, our thoughts move towards that worst case scenario. And that's what a chronic state of hyperarousal is for. It's to not be unprepared for when that awful thing happens, and to make sure that you are keeping that danger in mind. So as long as somebody's constantly in that fight or flight state, they're going to have catastrophic thinking. Nobody has these thoughts when they're relaxed.
That makes sense. And again, is this really common? You said most people experience the PTSD in this type of abuse, or a fair percentage of it. In that and all of those symptoms of PTSD, are we mapping them right to sort of the intuitive, I go right to negative thinking?
Are we mapping the kind of trauma response to this kind of? Oh, absolutely. And there's more I can say about that. I just wanted to pause there. So, we can, again, let's go through each of them. Re-experiencing, acting, feeling as though the original trauma is happening. Say the trauma is feeling alone, feeling vulnerable, feeling abandoned in a relationship. These are relational traumas, and they often happen with very self-involved, unempathic people, which is a pattern, obviously, with somebody who's extremely narcissistic. If that has been your experience, then at the first signs of difficulty with a friend, an emotional bump in the road, let alone a narcissistic partner, now you're geared up for it. This is going to trigger these memory feelings. Oh my God, here we go again.
Yeah.
So that's also a pathway to catastrophic thinking, where it immediately triggers those feelings as though, oh, I'm back in it. Here, this is going to be happening to me again. And this explains why sometimes people wind up having these thoughts in a relationship, say with a therapist. Right? I do a lot of correcting people emotionally with the catastrophic thinking that comes up with us, just kind of having me check in and say, right now, are you feeling judgment from me? Are you feeling like is it feeling like I'm criticized? No. And that's a way of bringing the person out of that re-experiencing, which leads to the catastrophic thoughts.
Wow, this is really important. So cognitive distortion and cognitive dissonance, like I hear those words thrown around, and I've said cognitive distortion in my videos before, and people are like, you're wrong, it's cognitive dissonance. And I'm like, pretty sure it's cognitive distortions when we are having these negative thought patterns. Can you explain the difference between the two? Is there a difference for people to hear?
Well, yeah, catastrophic thinking, here's the clearest way I can put it, and which is, I talk about with people who are extremely narcissistic, they are organized around what I call triple E, right? Exploitation, doing whatever it takes to feel special no matter the cost to others; entitlement, acting as if the world owes them and should bend to their will; empathy impairments. Right? But for survivors of abuse, and particularly when they've had, again, a selfish or self-involved partner where they've had to manage these experiences of distress on their own, this is going to be a key component in what we talk about with this negative thinking, that sense of aloneness, of utter aloneness. They are only going to feel like they can manage safety and make sure they are on top of feeling safe with a kind of preoccupation that I call triple P, which is focusing on prevention, focusing on prediction, and focusing on being prepared. And when you think of negative thoughts like catastrophic or distorted cognitive distortion, where you're reading something there worse than it actually is, that is all about triple P, right? If I don't trust that somebody is going to be with me in a time of stress, and in fact that they're going to make it worse, if they're not going to support me, if they are not going to help me with what those experiences feel like emotionally,
Mhm.
which you don't get with a partner who can't securely attached, who is too self-involved, self-focused to do so.
Mhm.
Then my only way of making sure I'm safe now and in the future is to predict danger, to be on the lookout for it, to see it as quickly as possible, to
Mhm.
prevent it,
Mhm.
because it's just up to me. And as soon as you start to recognize that, it makes sense why people would go up in their head and try to think through and control the possibility of the bad thing to come, because there's no sense that if it does come, they're going to have other resources and other help and other sources of resilience.
Mhm.
I hope we get time to talk about that, helping with that isolation, because that's part of the what to. This is very different from cognitive dissonance, because cognitive dissonance is really about what do you do if
Too much.
if an experience, what you go through in a relationship, for example, doesn't match what your beliefs are. The
Mhm.
idea of cognitive dissonance is, well, if this person is treating me like a bad person, really, really bad, putting me down, then maybe I need to adjust my thinking. That's cognitive dissonance, right?
Mhm.
Where, as to reduce the dissonance, I change my beliefs in response to the experience. Because see, it can lead to negative thinking, particularly about the self, but it's a very different feel than this idea of triple P.
Mhm. I love triple P. I can't wait to write a meme about that. So is this kind of tied, if it was the fight, flight, or freeze, I'm picturing the caveman hiding from the saber-toothed tiger and predicting and knowing that danger is in the distance. So does it tie into, again, PTSD and then the fight, flight, or
Yes.
freeze? Seems like it's more of the get prepared to fight, but also you're freezing at the same time of these negative thought patterns.
Precisely. You're bringing us back to the trauma symptoms again, and I'm glad you are, because yeah, again, it's wired into us. I want to say that too, that part of the pervasiveness of these responses is that they serve an adaptive function. If
Mhm.
you are in if you're in emotionally and physically dangerous environments, it's better to assume that there's danger there, and that's the part that sort of we're prepared for as human beings out there in the world. If the rustling in the bushes is a tiger, then the cost of us assuming it isn't is pretty damn high. And one of the clusters of post-traumatic stress disorder, that hyper arousal, being keyed up on edge, alert to danger, is all about making sure that you read whatever signs there are as that rustling in the bushes, so that the upsetting, dangerous, distressing, horrible event doesn't happen again.
Mhm.
And now translate that into catastrophic thinking. Oh, it must be
Mhm.
something awful. That what's happening now must be a sign of some awful thing to come.
It's predicting
And
the future.
yes, it's the predict part of triple P.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
This is like, if I look at this, and I guess my question here is, I had narcissistic parents, so this has always been my modality. I don't even pass go. I just go into the world is falling apart. I've gotten better since I've healed, but my entire life, my childhood, my life, I did this is because of the abuse that I suffered. So is it something that people can come along and just carry along with their life because of that trauma early, and then it just continues on? Or is it something that, let's say, they've never had that pattern like I did, but they are in a narcissistic relationship, an unsafe place, that it now gets born?
I think it's really common, and this is true of all abuse, right? That a lot of times people who land in an abusive relationship, they've had previous experiences of abuse.
Mhm.
That said, anytime you take someone, take someone who's securely attached, and by that I mean that they have what's called affective dependence. They trust that when they're sad, scared, blue distress that someone will be there for them. What happens is if you take that person and then put them in a relationship where the experience is entirely different, and like most of us, we work to try to stay in a relationship. Maybe they start to have cognitive dissonance. Maybe it's not all that bad. Maybe there's something I'm doing. Maybe they start to blame themselves. All right. If you take someone in with that experience where they haven't had narcissistic parents in the past, and then land them in that situation, now they have that experience of aloneness again. Even if somebody who's securely attached can land in a relationship where they feel emotionally isolated, where they're not sure they can depend on this person, where they're not sure they're entirely safe. And then as soon as that happens, we're going to rely on calling these strategies for coping, including catastrophic thinking.
Yeah, thank you. That answers that for sure. Again, it was sort of like the root was where I was going with that. What do we do about it? What do people that experience this, how do you help people get this, processing to change?
Step one is just educating them the way we are right now. I mean, this is a lot of the kind of education I do. I haven't done it in sequence the way we're doing it right now. And it was only after sort of mulling over the conversation that I would have with you that I thought of how neatly catastrophic thinking derives from each of these clusters of symptoms and post-traumatic stress disorder. So I always do some of that you've helped me organize it in this way. And the starting point is helping people recognize when they are in a fight or flight state. Because again, go back to what hypervigilance and hypervigilance thoughts, which are also circular, right? If my feeling is the only way to stay safe is to be alert and on guard for danger, then the contents of my thinking are going to be filled with those potential dangers. But now I'm also generating a constant sense of danger that keeps me on hyper alert and hyper arousal. And that's the whole point of it, because if you've had these experiences where you don't feel like it's safe to relax into somebody's arms in a relationship over a long period of time, figuratively and literally, if you don't feel like it's safe to trust yourself with them, then you need to be on guard. That's what hypervigilance, hyperarousal are. So I teach people, like, what do you feel in your body? Like, to really tune into the feelings of anxiety so that they know when they're in that chronic fight or flight state that we need to do something to help them first down regulate. And with a lot of trauma survivors, meditation isn't all that helpful. I mean, you've probably come across this for people for whom relaxing your guard, and this is why I brought that up a few moments ago, is dangerous. The first signs they feel like they're relaxing or getting calm, they actually have a paradoxical reaction where they get anxious, like, oh my gosh, can I really do this? So you want to think of what are the ways to take somebody out of a fight or flight state to see what their thinking is then and how things look, right? To take them out of, is it safe? Is it dangerous, to get back to that more nuanced state. So that can be done, sure, with meditation, relaxation exercises, but it can also be done with intensive exercise of some kind, because you get your heart rate up, especially for people who don't feel that stillness is safe. Run around the block, jump up and down, shake yourself out. I do that with people sometimes to get that energy out, and that can bring online a parasympathetic response. And as simple as that is, if you start to feel calming and then come back to whatever the situation is, your thinking might be slightly different. It almost certainly will be, as long as you're calm inside. It's going to shift things. So that's the first thing I try to help people do.
Okay, then what?
There's deeper issues here. So again, let's come back to exactly what happens when somebody is in this state of mind. Predict, prevent, and prepare. That state of mind is all about, it's just up to me. There is no one else. If you've had narcissistic parents, or you're in a relationship like this, you don't feel like your partner's going to come to your aid or your parent's going to come to your aid. So again, what recourse do you have except to go up into your head to manage the danger. And that's what this preoccupation and catastrophic line of thought is about. It's controlling the potential danger by seeing it coming, predicting, preparing for it by going into the head.
Mhm.
So what replaces that is feeling like people can be there for us.
Mhm.
So I work with people on increasing their sense of attachment security or restoring it if they've had in the past.
Mhm.
If you've had just one person who was that person who was there for you, push comes to shove, whatever you're feeling, they would listen to you, they would be there for you. Everybody's got at least one person, even the most extremely extreme trauma survivor experiences I've got plenty of people over the years. There's always the one person, and I have them recall that, call that up to try to get into to that feeling state of what it's like to be able to share those feelings instead of bearing the burden completely by themselves. I do this between too. As a psychologist, as a therapist, I'll help people experience it with me. And then again, lo and behold, if you can restore a sense of trust that people can provide comfort and safety in this mutual fashion rather than me just having to work it out on my own, the catastrophic thinking comes down.
Mhm. That makes sense. It's basically rephrasing some of the things in your mind, right? You're putting in the thought of safety and just bringing back those memories so that they can remember them. And I am always advising people to like, is there any evidence to the fact that there's a tiger in the garden, right? Is there just
Examine
really
the evidence.
logical
Yes.
part of our
Yeah.
brain to kick in, but then finding that safety place. And again, the feeling is always what we have to tap into. Where do you feel it? Can you touch it? Is it a color? Just wait, how high is it? I always tell, like, you go to the hospital, where's your pain level? 1 to 10. And I'm like, where's your anxiety? And what can we do? Like the running, the exercise, the working it to
Perfect.
lower that from the 10 to a
Yes.
4. And then you're
Yes.
in a better place to start to receive some of the other messages that you need.
And what happens is it brings online our more fully resourced adult present sense of self rather than being led by those trauma feelings, this is why I prefer the term memory feelings, because they really aren't reality. They aren't what's happening now.
Mhm.
They're that feeling coming back, which is part of trauma. So absolutely, I'm glad you're bringing up the felt sense is so important. I
Mhm.
work a lot with people on that. So if I'm having it between the two of us, if
Mhm.
that person feels safe with me and I have them tune into that, or if it's a memory of somebody in the past, how can you tell you feel safe?
Mhm.
Right? What are you feeling inside internally? What are the physiological cues? There's something that tells you that you feel helped right now
Mhm.
and that you feel okay. What is it? And really drawing that out. And then again, I use that as kind of a platform. Okay, from there, when you return to this event, what thoughts come to you now? It 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 often just activates that more logical state of mind. It's a nice direct route to
Mhm.
like go through the feelings first.
Right.
So I'm so glad you brought that up. The felt sense,
Yeah.
another way of reducing catastrophic thinking.
Yeah, to me, it again, this is the work I had to get through to learn to turn these voices off. Like, we would have, it was a couple years ago, we had no heat in the middle of the winter, and my son lives with me, and I was like, we're gonna get evicted. Like, oh, he's like, we just don't have
Yes.
heat, mom. And I'm like,
Yes.
oh, right. It was just the way my brain went, and it took, my adult son to say, no. And it was like, oh yeah, I'm doing it again.
Good.
Like,
It's
it's patterns. We get into a thing and we have to catch ourselves. We have to go, am I doing that? Is my brain going there? Like, grab a hold of the rope and pull it off the cliff before you go all the way to the catastrophic thought. And so
yeah.
it's training your brain to catch it and then tune into the feelings, tune into what you're going to do to pull yourself out. So what you're saying is amazing. What else do we want to know about this topic?
I would want to mention. I want to come back to the experience again of how catastrophic thinking develops
Yes.
in the through development that you were referring to,
Mhm.
but also in a relationship, it can happen. If you, in a time of distress, when you're sad, when you're scared, when you're facing a difficult circumstance, if instead of hearing from somebody you feel that sense of security with, oh, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Uh, I know this is a terrible situation. I understand that you're feeling scared. And I also believe that we can figure it out together. And I believe I have trust in you.
Mhm.
I think you're so good at managing situations like this. And I'm here if you need help. Right. What that models is you are not alone. If even if the worst happens, there's a next step
Mhm.
and someone there to help you if the worst happens,
Mhm.
and we can figure it out together. There's a sense of community, there's a sense of connection. If instead you grow up with parents or have a partner who's like, why are you always doing stuff like this? I mean, you bring it on yourself. Can't you know what the hell were you thinking in the first place? This is so typical of you, right? If that's what you hear, you then internalize, and that becomes the response to a difficult situation. There's no there's no internal holding, there's no accompanying feeling that you carry with you of I got this.
Mhm.
Like, okay, this is upsetting and this is bad.
Mhm.
But you know, I know I'm smart. I know I have friends and I know they care about me. And I know some of them I can even turn to if I need to stay if I need to stay with Lisa for a night. She's there. I mean, she'll help me, right? Very different. And in the absence of that, we go to catastrophic thinking, right? Because again, it's all about prepare, predict, and prevent, and that's it. It's not about feeling like you have company, support, and help through a difficult experience. So another thing that I do to try to help people with this thinking is to be aware of what supports they have around them, emotional supports, to tune into sources of comfort and safety and really rely on them. And if they don't have them, to start building them, because that is also a way out of this kind of thinking. And relatedly, it's a way out of bad relationships,
Mhm.
because catastrophic thinking also blinds us to other possibilities. You know, it blinds us for one thing to the possibility of having a relational experience that holds us instead of hurting us.
Mhm. Right, right. And the examples that you gave were brilliant because everyone can relate to them. Every single person that is going to watch this video is going to go, that's what my narcissist sounded like. I would have a trouble, something would be wrong, and I would be wrong, and I would be blamed, and it just piles on. So the language of an abuser, in this case, a narcissist, who is going to be saying those things to you, it gets drilled into you so much that it becomes like, again, an auto response. It's like there is no past, it's just like, okay, they've just put me down and I got no support, I'm alone, and we go right back into it. And we don't ever get that feeling that you're describing of someone who is supportive. So victims like have to hear this, because the stuff we hear after they are on their healing path is, I'll never love again, I'm too
Yeah.
damaged, I'll be alone for the rest of my life, I'm gonna die alone. I mean, the really good ones that really go to the high, I'm gonna die alone. And it's so scary to them, right? Those are the messages that they have gotten from the language of being with a narcissist.
And very often a direct message,
Mhm.
right? This is part of the reason we internalize these things, and they come to feel truth, is that is also a way of coping. That is an adaptation. It's kind of uh, mostly unconscious. If you can't beat them, join them.
Mhm.
Right? If I'm going to have to manage and stay in a relationship like this, I'm going to have to think like this person. And this is where the predictive part gets in the way. But then there's also a very, very direct result of hearing these things, is that it is kind of conditioning,
Mhm.
right? Again, instead of me having an association to a sense that I'm going to be okay no matter what,
Mhm.
because the person who loved me modeled that, and they told me they would help me if I was struggling in some way, right? And if instead of that being what comes up, what happens is it's like, everybody know about Pavlov's dog, right?
Why don't
This
you
is
tell
what I
us,
mean
tell
by
us, put it in
conditioning.
there for a second, just so they know.
And so Pavlov did the original experiments where he showed how an involuntary response, like salivation, when it's paired with something, some other event, like a bell ringing, over time, the bell ringing will cause the salivation. These are trauma responses that we're talking about, and they're adaptive in context. If we are in a dangerous environment, we have to be alert to danger, and we have to be thinking about it, and that's how we're going to survive, right? But if every time you have a problem, that if you feel accompanied and you have support, doesn't have to feel like the end of the world. What you hear is one of these messages. Now that involuntary trauma response, oh my God, what's going to happen, is now conditioned. It's like the tone or the bell that rings in Pavlov's experiments.
Yeah, that's exactly as you were putting it together. I was like, do I have a bell around? I was ready to go ding, because this is how it's all happening. Have we missed anything that people need to know about this?
Modeling, direct modeling too, where you can have an experience that can set you up for this kind of catastrophic thinking in a relationship with somebody who isn't supportive, who's narcissistic, who's self-involved. If every time something difficult happened to you growing up, every time there was a loss, a tragedy, some kind of distressing event, what you heard was, oh my God, what are we going to do? Like, it's over. We're screwed. This is terrible. This is the worst thing that's ever happened, right? If that's what you heard, then you internalize that, and that becomes the response. And so the modeling itself can get inside of us, and then we actually feel like that's the proper response to the situation, again, because there wasn't that sense of, it's going to be okay, sweetheart, we got this.
Yeah, I when you were talking about that, I flashed to some of my clients who have young children. Again, they were married for 20 years to a narcissist and had this battle in their head, heard the negative things, used it as a response, and then their kids come along and they are just puppeting it back and being unsupportive, not even realizing they're being unsupportive because it's part of the normal response that they had to deal with when they were with the abuser.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So again, people have to learn that they can change this and turn things around, because it's going to be a handicap in our lives if we do not do the work to learn how to turn these thoughts off and rescue ourselves before we go off the edge.
Yes. And I think I hope the take home, and I want ringing in people's ears, is that really all this is about is undoing aloneness and feeling safe, as odd as that sounds. Meaning, if your experience has been, you better be on guard, you better be alert, to potential danger in a relationship or experiences that might come along, then it won't feel safe relaxing your guard. So there's a kind of nervous system practice, whole body felt experience of seeing that you can stay in that state of being comforted by someone, of feeling helped, of feeling held, of feeling secure, and nothing bad will happen now.
Right. And if you think about victims, that the feeling safe is the hardest part. How do they trust the other person, the new person? Because when all they have is the evidence of why, when they've trusted before, it didn't work out so well.
Exactly.
Right? So it is something to undo, and that's a whole nother video to talk about trust. And people have to realize that when we build a better trust foundation, then we bring better people in our lives. We don't have, some people don't have a lot of credentials for how to trust.
Yes.
And then they're like, oh my God, I made another mistake. Well, what did they do that was trustworthy? I don't know, just gave it to them. You're like, okay, well, we've got to backtrack that, because that is also another kind of side effect, if you would, where we trusted, it didn't work out so well, but we didn't really have this footprint of what it means for someone to be trustworthy in our life.
And mutuality and the unfolding of that trust. Yes, exactly. This is the problem I think of as kind of, I'm so scared to jump out of the airplane, I'm just going to jump, and I forget my parachute, because that is our response to terrifying events, right? Is to either be on the alert. Hypervigilance and avoidance are flip sides of the same coin. It's all the same thing. It's the preoccupation with danger. Either I can go out of my way to avoid it, or try not to think about it, or I can jump at the first signs of it. I can freak it. I can, I can be scared at the first signs of it. And, there is a kind of avoidance in blindly trusting.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Again, it's not taking care of yourself by giving trust away before someone's done it, or if they do trustworthy things, to just go, because you're used to that. So it's easier to let them off the hook in that case.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, Craig, this has been amazing. I am so, so grateful. I am so happy that we finally got to do this. Thank you so much for coming back. I hope you'll join us again.
I absolutely will. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Wasn't that great? I hope you all take note and even watch this 1 or 2 times, because what he said is what we all need to know and what we all need to focus on. Healing after abuse also means we have to learn to turn those negative thought patterns off, the ones that have been imprinted on our mind as a reaction to the abuse. We don't have to hold them anymore. So I hope that you enjoyed this. Again, my name is Tracy Malone from Narcissist Abuse Support. And if you haven't subscribed, please do check that little button down there, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you.